You. Oh, we are already beginning. We are doing it. So, you can begin today.
I can begin today?
The people that watched part 1, this is part 2. Yep.
I don't really remember where I left off.
You didn't really
I didn't talk that much about... I kind of gave like little...
Just
strings.
the childhood, that it was kind of not what you thought it was.
Because I've given so much of my like story and all of these other videos that I have on YouTube.
Yep.
So, and I wanted to let her give her story.
We're halfway through mine.
We
are going to...
But I guess the one that I'm going to talk more about is my journey... Ooh, a lot coming out of the throat. My journey into the music industry. And having this friend that I connected with and was brought into the music industry with, and kind of like how that unfolded, because it has to do with narcissism.
We know that's what half of the stuff we talk about is about narcissism, yes.
But where do I start? So, after high school, when I stopped playing soccer, I felt lost, watched all my friends go to college, moved to Boulder, and I was living near CU Boulder while my friends were basically just going to college. And so I was partying with them and doing all this stuff. I had a job at a in the produce department at a grocery store, which was also, it was very serene, that job. Stacking fruit. Very, very grounding to make art with fruit, and then watch someone walk up and pull the whole thing down, and then you just have to go rebuild it. It's like those monks that make the mandalas in the sand.
I know exactly what that's like, because I used to work in clothing stores, and I would fold all the stuff super nicely, and then someone messes up the whole stack and you have to fold everything again. Yep.
I feel like that's a metaphor for these narcissistic relationships too.
Yeah, and we can definitely, I have so many examples that I'm gonna get into after we first listen to you for a while.
But so I started really getting into like electronic music and dubstep, and starting to go to those shows, starting to do all the drugs, all that Molly, all of that stuff. And my friend, I'll say his name's Shorn Stevens. He's not my friend anymore. We went to high school together. At the high school that I've talked about in my videos was like a government oasis high school. There was a lot of families involved in covert intelligence and in being connected to this matrix of like the military industrial complex, and in these kind of hidden groups. This area in Broomfield, and the high school I went to, was like filled with these types of families. And so Shorn and I started getting into this music. He decided to make a blog called Moonbroton, and we were like promoting people's music. And we wanted to make music at that time and DJ and do all that stuff. And so we were trying to figure out how to do that, learning how to make DJ mixes, and we ended up just going quickly into the business side of things. Like, we stopped trying to make music. We stopped trying to do that kind of professional journey, and took right on the back end of like show promotion, artist management, all of that type of stuff. And so the relationship that I had with Shorn was very, very karmic. It was very like, we butted heads all the time. He was notorious within our friend group of being the one that was the narcissist, of being the one that was always making people feel lower than him, was always trying to put people down, was always gaslighting people. So we had this very heated dynamic of, you know, we would be like DJing at a party, and we would get in like almost like a fist fight behind the DJ tables, because I would be all drunk and I would be being annoying, and he wouldn't want me to DJ, so then I would like turn a button and then he'd like smack me in the face, and it would turn into this like whole thing. And so it was the definition of a karmic relationship, and I'm going to show how that stuff correlates to all of this other karma that's in these other lives. So eventually he got introduced to this EDM.com company, which was a larger scale of the things that we were doing in the space. So he got hired there, and he was basically planning on like bringing me along with him. I was like his right-hand man in all of the stuff. So after a few months, he introduced me more to them. I got to know them, and I started doing like internship stuff for them. The EDM network, EDM.com, is also called Artist Intelligence Agency. I moved into a house with them. It was like 6 guys, and it was just the definition of people wanting to be in the music industry, who were partying, who were wanting it for kind of like this fame type of thing. And his and mine relationship continued to be a lot of tension. And eventually it ended up where I almost got fired because I was addicted to Xanax and I was doing really stupid things on account of the company. And so I almost got fired. They made me move out of the house for about 6 months. And then I started working my way back in to come back in a more stable state of mind. And so I started coming back into this company, and right when this was happening, there was all this stuff that was happening with Shorn, and Shorn was the A&R director, overseeing the music reception, the signing, the artistic side of holding relationships with the artists and the managers. And so he was starting to have these problems with the people who were running the thing, and they started bringing me in to be the A&R director to start to replace him, to move him into this other space. So it just got worse and worse. Like there was so much, there was fighting, there was a nonstop argument, it was all drama. And so eventually Shorn got fired. I think he got fired, or he left. I can't remember. I think he got fired because he was just in this space of like, he was not treating anyone with respect whatsoever. So when he left the company, that's where my ex-wife then came to the company and started interning. So that's where Tia showed up, and that's where her and I first met. So we were in this office, the whole company in this office in Denver, and very shortly after I stepped fully into this director of A&R position, we ended up finding out that this guy who started the company was stealing like millions of dollars from the company. He was literally like writing himself checks from the company, and then he would just go cash them and just buy things. And he was very delusional. Like he thought that was okay. Like he thought he was like, it's my company, it's my money. Like he was lowering our salary while he was getting bigger houses. It was like the whole problem in the industry of CEO versus employee. And so the label administrative partner, John, he ended up flying out to Colorado, and he informed us like, hey, there's a case now going against this guy. He was stealing millions of dollars, and we're about to move the label team away from Colorado. And so it all happened very quickly, and we ended up moving to New York because that's where the partnership team was existing. So went through this whole process of the CEO who it was like this delusional narcissist that thought that it was his money, and it was just he was very much draining he was just taking the company down with him. And so John, the label administrator, got the whole company, and we went through this whole thing in New York where that was like where Tia and I came together, and then Tia left the company, then I ended up leaving the company. So it was this whole like 4 or 5 year span, 6 year span, where it just kind of unfolded and I realized I needed to leave the company. So that's where I entered this spiritual space. It was right before I was leaving the company. I was in, and I decided to go do this first like community retreat in LA. It was the very first spiritual community thing that I ever paid for. And when I went out to LA, I ended up reconnecting with Shorn. We like reconnected in between there at like a Red Rocks concert, and it turned out he was into the same spiritual stuff as me, and so we like started talking again. And so then I hung out with him when I was in LA, and it just kicked off this whole like spiritual relationship. Like he introduced me to like he gave me the Ram Dass book, and there was this whole thing of like he was showing me what the Vedas were and bringing me into like mantras, and we just started like having a spiritual bromance, basically spiritual bromale,
Really?
covert narcissist relationship is what it was. But
I don't think it was very covert. He was very open about his
no, because now he gets into the spiritual stuff.
Yeah.
So this is where the covert aspect comes into play, because I'm watching him go through the same stuff as me. I'm having these very heightened experiences, like tuning into love, having all of this stuff, and he's like mirroring this the whole time, but we live on different states.
Yeah.
So he's in California, I'm in New York, so it's like this long distance bromance.
Yeah.
And so we start having all this stuff like business models, blueprints, like all these things we're gonna do, how we're gonna bring this this healing to the music industry and combine all of this stuff. And so it was just this like literally like head over heels and completely dropped.
Head over heels bromance.
That's what it was. Because then I dropped that thing that I knew he had that whole time when we were first friends.
Yes.
So I took the false light of the spiritual mask, and I said, oh, well, he's saying these things to me. He's going into the same ideas. I'm having these experiences. So therefore, he must be doing the same thing. He must be actually trying to embody these things rather than just use it as a mask. Mm-hmm. So it was like 2 years of, we had all of these heightened spiritual experiences together. Like at one point I flew out to Colorado and we had this whole week where it was this like cosmic initiation, and we were being brought into this Vedic, what is it called? Like it's like an ashram, basically, like a Vedic lineage. So he was really introducing me to all of this Vedic wisdom, which is basically now the main thing that I use in my wisdom understanding. And so he was like reflecting me to myself, and I thought it was coming from him this whole time.
Yeah.
So I had this inferiority relationship from the previous narcissistic behavior, where I was then holding him in this subconscious like superior type of complex, and he's presenting all of this higher dimensional information that I don't know yet, that is then making me like creating glamour and all of these things.
Putting him on some kind of pedestal.
But the whole time, he's telling me about these concepts about like spiritual glamour, astral glamour, like all of these things. So he's like throwing it, he's like telling me what's happening. And I'm like, oh my God, wow. Like I'm seeing how this is happening in my life. Like I hadn't turned it to him yet. But so as this is going on, where he's communicating to this guru in India, and they're like he's getting like all these books from this website, and we're learning all this Vedic stuff about these mantras, and he's asking these questions to this guru, and the guru will like email back and all this stuff. And so fast forward like a couple years, and we've had this kind of like, I think we're in this spiritual space together, like we're trying to figure out how to make things happen. I'm giving him the benefit of any doubt that I had that he is that type of person anymore. And this whole time I'm trying to like pull him into my timeline. I'm trying to like give him opportunities that I'm creating for myself, that I have, because I think that he's this like spiritual, this partner that's in this whole type of agreement and contract that we're having. We're having synchronicity after synchronicity, like all of these synchronicities unfolding. And it was right around this time when I first got this insight into Nancy. And so at this point, I had not questioned her intentions. I had not questioned his intentions. I was just in this kind of like spiritual, like openness space of thinking that everyone's good, everyone in my life is on my side, all of these things. And so and I say this because it was like this parallel unfolding that was happening. Like I was getting all of these synchronicities with him, and then all of these other synchronicities that were happening in my life, like just higher dimensional awareness. And I was on an edible, and I was visiting Nancy for the first time since I'd had this like really strong spiritual awareness, like this higher self state. And I ate this edible and I started like disassociating from my body. I started not like in a negative way, but I was just really seeing this heightened perspective that I hadn't experienced before. And I started seeing images of her as this like janitor, this like cleaning lady at this like orphanage for children. And that this orphanage had something to do with like negativity, like reptiles and like all this stuff. And at that time, I also thought that the karmic principle was that people have dark lives and they also have love lives. That it was this idea that, oh, if someone's had these lives of love, then they have this balanced principle where they've lived lives of darkness to understand.
On the fence.
I know. I saw that earlier too.
It's a sign.
Yeah, it's Mary Magdalene.
Okay, continue.
And they like, what was I saying?
Love.
Yeah,
life.
like it was this idea that if I saw someone in their life, they had a life where they were this reptilian, they hurt children, I would give them the benefit of the doubt at that point in my life, thinking like, oh, this is just how things go.
That
people have dark lives, people have love lives, and they decide to have both.
Yes.
So I was still in that space, and at that point, I didn't think anything of that towards Nancy. Like I knew we were distancing and that I was creating more of a spiritual foundation, but I was still being very vulnerable with her. I was still relying on her for advice to share these things about my life. And so I just put it to the side and just like kept going. And so I don't remember exactly what it, so then with Shorn, he's talking to this guru and I'm getting these like feelings that there's something negative going on with this guru. And Shorn asked this guy, he asked him if him and I should learn Sanskrit. And the guru responds and he says, no, don't bother learning Sanskrit because English is going to be the one world language.
I remember you telling me that.
Right when I got this response, I was really starting to understand language, how it was going to change, how it was going to become this light language. And I got that and I was like, what the fuck? That can't be true. That does not feel true.
Because that would be like people asking me, oh, if I want to understand Gnostic scriptures, should I bother with Aramaic? And I'm not going to say, oh, you need to be super fluent in Aramaic. No, but I am going to say it is, if you feel that you want to learn it, it is going to be very beneficial because you are going to see so many more layers of these original scriptures if you understand a little bit of Aramaic.
Yep, exactly. And so that's how I felt about it. Like this guru telling us what to do, saying not to do something. At that moment, I said to Shorn, I was like, this dude's a reptilian. I'm positive that this guy is a reptilian and that he has negative intentions. And Shorn just kind of like, it's the same reaction that these other people have had in my life that I'm now seeing are more negative than I thought. They kind of like, they just brush it away. They kind of minimize it. And they're kind of like, yeah, you know, like, I know that stuff exists, but, and it's kind of this like they almost justify the reason for wanting to stay in that mindset of being like dependent on these people. So these things just started unfolding where then I was questioning why Shorn was not really receiving these things, like how this was happening where I was starting to see this stuff and he wasn't. And then we had another interaction where he had this like Aleister Crowley tarot deck. And I was like, you know, Aleister Crowley is like a very dark magician, right? Like, you know this. And he's like, no, that's not true. That's propaganda. That's what this was his response about a lot of things. About the moon being fake and hijacked and like all this stuff. It's like, it's propaganda. They're trying to trick you. And so that's what, and with the Aleister Crowley thing though, in that moment I knew, I was like, no, like I know this guy's a dark magician. I'm like, I'm just going to let you roll with it. You just got to learn your lessons. And so it was still this feeling of like, I'm just going to be with him while he uncovers this stuff and we're going to be friends. And then just thing after thing started happening. He moved into this house and he got this girlfriend and there were weird vibes with this girl. And then the house, I could see that the landlord was this reptilian, and it was like this whole thing that I was starting to see, but I still had confidence in his and I's relationship. And then when Tia and I scheduled the marriage, I asked him to be the officiator for the marriage because I knew he was into spiritual stuff. We wanted it to be more of like a spiritual thing. And right when this happened, I started questioning who has true intentions for me in my life. Because one, I saw the first side of Nancy where I didn't invite my stepsisters to the wedding because I wasn't close with them, and Nancy flipped. She gaslit me, she yelled at me, she did all of the stuff. And that was my first interaction with her where I had to tell her, you need to stop doing this now.
Yes.
And she snapped back out of it at that moment and did the whole apologizing, all this type of stuff, whatever. But at that moment I started questioning, does she actually have the intentions for me that she says that she does? And at this point I still thought she was my mother. So I was like, I actually need to question what she desires. Like, has she been kind to me in other lives? Like, what is this? And so at that time I was already moving into the Akashic records. I was singing mantras a lot. I was getting a lot of visions of other lives. And so this was a thing with Shorn as well. We would go into the Akashic records. He would relay information to me that at the time I didn't know was false, but he was relaying and giving me certain pictures of Akashic records that wasn't true at all. And so I just started going through this declaration of like, I'm questioning people's intentions in my life, and I'm actually going to start like figuring out what's going on. And so that just led up to the wedding. And because I set that intention at the bachelor party, I watched Shorn do this whole narcissistic thing that was exactly what he used to do when we were friends. And so when we were friends the first time, and at that moment, as soon as he did it, I was like, I know that he's doing something. Like, what I see in him is not true. And I can tell that there are now red flags that I have to deal with him. So he was already set to do the wedding. I just let it go, let it continue. And then at the wedding, there was this, he kept trying to get me to do these courses with this guy that I was telling him was a reptilian. And he like kept trying to get me to do these courses. So it was this whole like bubbling up at this time. However, I still had some sense of like trust and faith within him. I had these red flags, but it was still like at the very beginning of like giving benefit of the doubt. And he ended up having this interaction with this woman at my wedding, one of my friends, where he had this girlfriend at the time, met this girl, fell head over heels in love with her the night before the wedding, went back to his house, broke up with his girlfriend, came back to the wedding, and then decided to try and pursue this friend. And so then the friend was like asking me about him. I was like, yeah, like we've been friends. I still trust him because I still didn't have this full red flag like embedded in my awareness. And then the girl who like had a connection with him, she like gave him his numbers. This whole high school drama thing, basically, that Shorn's girlfriend ended up calling our friend like 2 days later and was like, Shorn's acting super like he's lying about stuff. He tried to delete your number from his phone when I asked him about you. So it basically just showed that he was literally the same exact person that was in high school. He was playing all of these games. He was doing all of these things. And that was the thing that made me see this red flag and like connect the picture. And then he kept trying to get me to do this course with this reptilian. And during this honeymoon, this is when everything just lifted up. This was like 2 weeks before I got the suppressed memories. And so everything was just like being unearthed. And I said, I'm not going to respond to him, and I'm just going to see what happens, because we would just text back and forth. And I stopped responding, and we haven't talked since. Nothing was
How
ever.
How long was that?
That was in 2022, the beginning of 2022. And I've sent him a text since then, no response, nothing. And I'm now seeing how he basically was turned into this sleeper cell, and that I saw all of these Akashic records once I recognized this red flag, that in these other lives, he's actually murdered me, he's murdered my family, he's been a dark magician that's done all of these things, opened dark portals to help enslave planets. And as soon as I started actually being willing to accept it, it was just this flood. And like one of these Akashic records, he said that I was this girl, he was my sister, and that we were both young and we got murdered, and it was this whole like dark experience. But what I ended up seeing was that I was the girl, he was this person that lured me in to getting murdered in that life, and so he actually helped participate in it. So it was like this whole flip where now I'm seeing in all these other lives where he is essentially the consciousness of the Lucifer, of the core Luciferic being. That is him. He is Thoth. He is essentially Voldemort. And the Voldemort is based off of this service to self being in the Essenes and Arcturus. And so I don't even know where to go from there, but it's just this whole reckoning with this narcissistic mask. And I've seen that him and I were put through the same kind of military programs and experiments, and that what they were trying to do with me is essentially what they've done with him. To whereas yes, I've woken up out of it, he is now tumbling headfirst into this sleeper cell, and I can feel him basically being activated by all of this darkness. So he's being prepared to be this Luciferic Antichrist type of embodiment. And it was just interesting. Now I see how there's this soul relationship between him and Nancy, and it's like this whole thing that they know of each other, and they've like orchestrated this whole thing together. So, Nancy, if you're watching this right now, that sucks. Shorn, what's up, buddy? Lisa, any of these people who I've confronted that continue to pay attention to my life, hello. That's all. Just want to give you a shout out because I know you're there.
Okay, so that's crazy, but a lot of people need to hear these examples. I think of how narcissism can also show up in real friendships. Mm-hmm. Or on the work floor, or like in any dynamics. These narcissistic connections can show up not just in a relationship or parent-child. This can happen in your friend group, and we often dismiss it because, oh, it's not like whatever. No, because if it's anyone that you have a connection with, whatever that may look like, you can have an imbalance. And somebody can be the narcissist, somebody can be the victim, if you want to call it that, but because it is in a way, and you think you owe people your friendship or whatever, and if they haven't really done anything abusive, like in the sense of they haven't physically abused you, oh, then your reason isn't good enough to not talk to them anymore. No, if you don't feel comfortable, that's enough reason. If you don't like having to respond to their messages, that's enough reason. If you feel dread and you just get this knot in your stomach when you feel you are obligated in keeping this connection going, then it's not good for you. And you don't have to explain anything. You can just decide, this is not good for me. I am no longer investing in this connection, whatever that is. Yes.
One tool that you can use if you're trying to figure out where these dynamics exist in your relationship, just stop reaching out to the person. And it doesn't mean that you're ending the relationship there. It doesn't mean that you're like creating this wall and distancing yourself. But if you want to understand the dynamic, stop reaching out in the normal pattern that you've imprinted on yourself with that relationship and just see what happens.
Yep. So yeah. So after that, you kind of had a whole spiritual...
Well, yeah, this was all when I was going through this like shamanic warrior initiation, because then it's like, I made a video about this too, but and I might have mentioned it in the last part, but like encountering these like dark wizards and these dark magicians in this like spiritual retreat, and getting in like a psychic battle, like all of that was unfolding at one time, and it was me being called to step into my power. And I was recognizing these narcissists because I needed to realize where I was withholding my power in my boundaries and in my relationship. And so it was the pinnacle of me actually waking up to recognize my full sovereignty, is really what it was. And it just brought me into this recognition again of how these beings will like reflect your wisdom and your soul blueprint that you have in your body, and like kind of try to get you to create it with them. Because they don't have that creative power. So they're constantly like reflecting and using that blueprint that's within you to get you to like join them on this little adventure.
I see. Because they're siphoning from you.
It's just like Lisa, the ex-roommate that I had this whole business blueprint for multiple years that I was putting into place, and the moment that her and I started creating like a business partnership together, that blueprint was claimed as hers, and she claimed herself as the founder of that thing. And that was when I saw the first red flag about that relationship. So then I still held my own. And it's just, I'm saying this because it's like, we all wonder how to get out of these bonds, but you just have to be willing. You just have to declare that you're not going to be giving yourself over to someone like that. And then they're going to show their true colors. And then you just need to walk away.
Because the thing is, either they're going to completely understand your boundary, or they're going to have a problem with your boundary, because your boundary is then going to be something that they don't like, because they've been so used to stepping over your boundary and not respecting your boundary. So when you then put a boundary in place, they're gonna have a problem with it, and you're gonna know, okay, thank you for illuminating, like the golden dragons always say. They are here to burn away illusion and illuminate the truth. So then you're gonna see what needs to be illuminated about this person. The behaviors that they've been trying to mask are going to then come up, because you are setting this boundary of, this is how I will be treated and no other way.
And some of them will agree to your boundary and make it seem like they're okay with it, when they're still just trying to maintain your attention in that relationship. That's exactly what Nancy did, my handler. She acknowledged the distance that was being created when I was stepping more into my spiritual identity, into my self-sustaining independence, and she would acknowledge it. She would say she's grateful for it, that she would try to express her emotions and be this like vulnerable, transparent person that was accepting the boundaries, and all of it was good. So then you just gotta keep listening to the boundaries that your heart is asking to be set, and keep enforcing what needs to be erected. And not erecting a wall, but you're erecting a vibration of a field that isn't allowing that stuff to hide in your field anymore.
That is true. Yep.
So what's your story? that you're saying in this one.
Yeah, so I think I kind of left off last time with this entire reawakening happening. So last time I talked about my childhood, going to Catholic school, and also, so if you haven't watched part 1, go back to part 1, because there's some funny stuff in there. We get interrupted halfway. Anyway, so I went to Catholic school, all that stuff. Little picture in there of me in my little monk robe. Go look at it. There's a baby being just baptized, all crazy. Go watch part 1 if you haven't yet. I talked then about that I was done with psychic stuff. I was psychic as a teenager. Then I was done with it. I said I don't want to do this. Then my psychic abilities got reawakened around 2016-17 because I was going through a whole bunch of trauma. And that's what the catalyst was for this whole reawakening. And that I basically had to make a whole bunch of life decisions. And so I left the marriage that I was in 2017. And it was a whole shift for me in stepping into this whole independence, basically, because I was in a trauma bond, and I didn't realize it until I started learning about trauma bonds. Until I started seeing the danger of the situation that I was in, and that it was actually dangerous. And it was not until the moment where basically I saw my dog about to be maybe killed. There was a moment where my dog was literally being pulled down the stairs by his leash, and my ex said, I'm now gonna go shoot this dog in the desert. And something happened in my brain that made me see, this man is dangerous. He will kill the dog. And it didn't matter that this was also being said to me. Similar threats were being made to me. Somehow they were just floops out of my brain, and I didn't, when you are in a trauma bond in this situation, you just kind of don't see the threats. But then when it was about this dog who I loved a lot, I was like, oh no, you are dangerous. And I could suddenly see who he was. This mask started to fall off. And we've talked about this in other previous episodes, specifically I think episode 5 about narcissism. I talked about it a lot in there. So all these little things started happening that made me see that I need to start planning my escape. And I talked a lot about that. I talked a little bit in the last episode and more in episode 5. Then I went and moved back to Belgium. So I was in the US. I was in the US for about 8 years. I said, now I need to go back. I went back, and I lived in Belgium for a couple of years. There I met the father of my son. We were already friends. We had known each other since I was 18, I think. And we kind of reconnected. And so, I'm trying to see how I'm gonna proceed with this story now. But basically, I just dealt with this whole narcissism healing that I was still going through, of course. So I arrived in Belgium being a complete wreck. There's really no other way to call it. It was so bad that if my phone would ring and it was my ex-husband, that I would go into paralysis. That is how trauma bonded I was. I was on the other side of the world, and I was physically going into paralysis when I saw that he was calling. My mom would look at me like, you are on the other side of the world. But this is a physical reaction that you have when you are healing from trauma, when you're coming out of a situation like that. So that is the state that I was in. So for some reason, I just had this safe feeling with this familiar person that I had known for a whole lot of years at that point. And of course I see now too how this was all karmically meant to happen and line up. There were all these soul contracts involved. So yeah, basically this was very similar to what he was explaining with his friend. There was initially a very spiritual connection with my son's father, a very spiritual connection where we had similar things that we were discovering, because I was just opening up again to spirituality. And we were both I saw this as a relationship where we were both going to dive really into ourselves and really do deep healing individually and together, all this stuff. I saw all this. And I was moving as we were going through years together of going through this journey. We were both artists, and I could see how I was not letting what was happening around me define my limitations. So I saw, okay, yeah, there's tons of other people out here doing this work, but nobody's going to be exactly doing what I'm doing. And I was just focusing on generating, on my frequency, on what can I offer. And I was seeing where he was very focused on what was happening around him and talking very negatively about other people in the art industry, just online. And I was seeing, and I talk about this, well, actually my friend Beverly talks about this in a podcast that just went online on my YouTube. That is a separate podcast. And it's all about narcissism as well, where me and her have a conversation, and she calls it failure to launch. That this is apparently a typical trait that certain people with personality disorders, such as histrionic personality disorder, narcissism, borderline, they suffer from failure to launch. Then they have all these grandiose ideas. I'm now literally quoting her. They have all these grandiose ideas. They explain these ideas to everyone that wants to listen. They're always explaining, but nothing ever really happens. And I started seeing this months. So in the beginning, I was completely wrapped up in all these stories, because I was like, oh yeah, you have so much inspiration, and there's going to be so many good things we're going to be doing together. Then I was seeing how it wasn't working. It was just, there was always a reason why it was not going to work, and it was always somebody else's fault. It was always somebody else's fault that he was not succeeding. And so, yeah, it was this pattern that I kept seeing. And I was basically investing a whole lot into my spiritual business, starting that up at the time. It was all in the very beginning phases of it, but I had told myself when I left the US with my daughter, I said, this is my mission. This is my entire mission. This is my priority. So that's what I was doing. And I thought, okay, this is also, like he said about his friend, that you are having the same mindset. Mm-hmm. And I was taking this opportunity of starting this business. It goes hand in hand with your own inner work. And one cannot exist without the other. That is simply the way it is. So then, basically, months would go by. Then I got pregnant too, and that was just more motivation for me. It was more motivation to step even more into my spiritual work. Now I was pregnant and I had a job too. I had a part-time job. I was cleaning houses on the side. I have a degree in education, and my family, friends, they were like, what are you doing? Why are you not getting a job as a teacher? Why are you cleaning houses? Why this, why that? and I was pregnant, and I was riding a bicycle because I don't have a car. And it's also very normal in Belgium and the Netherlands to still ride a bike, all this stuff. It's not like I'm racing or anything, I'm just, whatever. So I'm just doing all this stuff. Well,
you're not racing?
No, with this pregnant belly. Anyway, so I was really busy throughout this entire pregnancy. I had a whole lot of requests for portraits, readings. I was illustrating a book for a friend of mine while I was pregnant, and I needed one of those yoga balls because I had to draw constantly. I was drawing. I was constantly working on this lady's illustrations, and I couldn't sit on a chair, so I needed one of these things. So that's what I was doing, readings, all this stuff, still going to my job. It was only a part-time job, but still it was. And then part-time I was doing my readings, preparing for the baby, basically all this stuff. And I will never forget this one moment. We also moved from the apartment to a house because the baby was coming and my dog and all kinds of stuff. We couldn't stay in the apartment. So then I will never forget, we bought carpet that was rolled up, and it needed to be like flattened, put on the floor. And I remember that I was dragging this whole thing on my own, and I was very pregnant at the time. Not super, let's say 5 months pregnant or something. No, 3 months, a couple months pregnant. I don't know. I was pregnant, okay? And I remember thinking, like, is this the dynamics of how this is going to be? Because this is not really working for me.
Yeah.
And also the fact that everyone around me was starting to notice how he was a perpetual victim. In all the stories, he was the perpetual victim of everything around him. And everyone was starting to see, wait a minute, she's pregnant. She's starting up this whole little business on her own. She's actually leaving the house to make money. Like, how is it working out for her and not working out for you? And then, of course, anyway, this was a whole thing that kept on happening. Then COVID happened. Then COVID became the big scapegoat for why he was unable to make money. And for me, it did the opposite. Because I could not go back to work, because in the cleaning business, hygiene was really important. So I could not go back to work. My son was born. I was happy because I was able to stay home with him for an extra 6 months. So I was home with him until he was almost 9 months old, which is really good. So I just focused really hard on my own little business while COVID was happening and tried to do as much as I can online. And that's when I created this whole free intuitive development course that is now still online, and there's, I think, almost 600 people that have done the course since COVID began. So that's what I was working on back then.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so that's really good. And let me see where I'm going with this. It's they can find it. You can find my free course. It's called Activate Your Telephone Line to Source. Because it's basically your bloops activating your telephone line.
Floopsy.
Yes. So I did all that. And then in the end, like, things basically just went downhill because I was anchoring more and more into just truth. And that made me see where our relationship was just not at all balanced. It was just not balanced, and things were just going from bad to worse. And we were basically living two very separate lives, especially once I went back to my job. Then all my time went to either the job or just working on my business. And in the evenings, I was with my son because he was little. He would fall asleep early and we would just be together in the bedroom. And I would just be in there. And sometimes after he fell asleep, I would read a little bit. I would just be reading, but I would be next to him on the bed, stuff like this, because he was still very little. And so I just started diving deeper and deeper into spiritual development, and we were not really communicating. And it just became this very passive-aggressive dynamic where I was putting all my effort into creating like something for the future that was mine, like my business basically. Anyway, fast forward, we ended up separating, and I knew it was gonna be very dramatic because there was no easy way to tell him this. But I had to be really honest with myself and realize, okay, I cannot stay in this. If I'm going to be honest with myself, then this relationship is not good for me. This is just not working. It's just not, we are not embodying the same values. And the way that he would then also be very vicious about other people was then real quickly applied to me, because I then became the villain. So in those ways that he was treating other people, suddenly I was being treated that way. And after that, of course, I'm gonna like talk about what happened in between. But then I ended up traveling, I ended up living in Spain, but what happened was basically a modern day witch hunt or witch trial that I was the subject of. So I first moved in with my dad because I didn't really have anywhere to go. I had these 2 children, of course, and it was never my intention. When I separated from my son's dad, it was never my intention to punish him for anything, to deny him contact with his son. On the contrary, because he had a very good connection with my son, because he was home all the time. He was home during the day while I was at work, because I was going to this job. So he spent more time with our son than I did once I went back to work. So we had an agreement where half of the time he was at his house, half of the time he was at with my dad and me, where I lived with my father. So my son was spending time with both of us. But boundaries were not being respected, and it became basically harassment, and he would just show up at the front door. It would just not be like, he could not accept that we were done. He could not accept it. And after a while I had to really say, you cannot do this. But then I started just getting messages, calls. And when I say messages, I mean like 50 messages. 50 messages. And it would be first a lot of love bombing. I was the perfect person and he did everything wrong. Apologies. And I was like, this is not, none of this is helping anything. We right now have to find a way to get along so that we can be here for the children, for our son. So anyway, and of course, if I told him if I reinforced this boundary, it would immediately shift to this extremely vicious energy of me being the worst person on the planet. And again, 50 messages of how I was the most terrible person. So after a while, I just had to set this boundary of I will not be responding to these types of messages anymore, which made it, of course, it was like made the reaction very terrible on his end. After a while, so I then met somebody else. He will claim that I was already involved with this person, which is not true at all. We then moved to the other side of the country simply to get away, to get physical distance, because he would show up at my dad's house, all this stuff, to create physical distance. But at that point, I also knew that there were definitely attachments involved. There was some kind of spiritual interference happening on his end, because later he would also fabricate stories that never happened, and that I'm like, where is this even coming from? So anyway, eventually, and I think I also explained a little bit about this, me and this new partner got the opportunity to move to Spain for work stuff. There were work opportunities that we could participate in and be a part of, some kind of group stuff that we were organizing in Spain anyway. So I had to really think about this, because that would mean that I would not be seeing my son for extended periods of time. Spain is not that far away from Belgium. So but I would be gone for like a while. So I managed to have a phone call with his dad. We had a whole open conversation. He was very calm, accepting, and literally said, yes, if this is what you have to do, you have to do, because it was never my intention to take him with me and to just make decisions for him. It was not my choice to make. So I decided, you are already home. You are always with him. And my son and him did have a very close connection. So I decided to then take this opportunity, but first to talk about it with his dad, which we did. He said, I understand, and you will be in touch with him. We're gonna set up video call, blah, 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 all this stuff. So that's what happened. We had a whole agreement that I was going to talk to my son regularly. I was going to be in his life, see him. Of course, Spain is not super far. It would be easy every couple of months maybe to kind of see him, to come visit, whatever, for him to come visit me, whatever. We all had to decide this really quickly, because COVID was kind of done, but they were talking about a travel ban. So we had to decide before Christmas, and it was the beginning of December. So we had to organize all of this real quickly. And then we left, and it went okay for like 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And then he completely just, something happened. And all of a sudden he was really triggered by my new partner, and he just cut the phone off one time. And I got this like in the middle of a video call with my daughter. My daughter is screaming. It's the day before my son's birthday. This happens, she's crying. I'm half paralyzed, like, why did he hang up? And I get a whole bunch of just this whole slew of insults, of being called all kinds of names again. And I'm just like, I cannot do this. At that point, I was already so vulnerable, and because I had to make this decision, and I was not with my son on his birthday, during the holidays, and then I get called all these names, all this stuff, and I said, I cannot be subjected to these messages. In order to, like, if all I want to do is be in touch with my son, but this is the cord that is connected to it, I will not do it. So then I made the decision to block him. I said, I cannot do this. And that's when people say, yeah, you cannot block them, you cannot this. If you are literally just so done, you have no other choice. You have no other choice. You have to. So that's what I did. After that, of course, this whole campaign began with all these fabrications, all kinds of stories, a lot of stuff. And there were periods of time in between where I unblocked him, where I attempted to have forms of normal communication, and it would work for a little bit, and then it would happen all over again. It would start all over again. And I also had my daughter to deal with. I was homeschooling her. I was combining my business, which then suddenly when I had to go full time with this business, because there was just also all kinds of stuff happening in Spain, which I'll get into maybe in another or in another episode anyway.
We got plenty.
Yeah.
We got a bunch of episodes to make about these stories.
So what happened then is basically that I kept on being subjected to this behavior, and I decided that, yeah, this is just not gonna work for me. And then I had to start justifying myself based on the fabrications of him and his stories to people around me, to these people around me in my life that started asking me questions about a situation that I was not even a part of. I'm like, this is all drama that is happening on your side. I'm not even in this. I'm in no way even part of these conversations. But now you want me to give you my side when I've given you my side over and over and over. And I am not going to keep explaining and explaining. I won't. So then I had to set a boundary with a few people. I had to really go no contact with a few people. But yeah, after that, basically, I decided I did not want to talk to my son's dad anymore because the stuff that he was saying was just incredibly vicious. And that's what made me see that I always knew he had like this perpetual victim mindset, but that there was definitely some form of narcissism happening. And the funny thing is that his ex actually had accused him of being a narcissist, and I didn't see it at the time. I'm like, oh no, because he didn't have the typical grandiose narcissistic behavior. He was always the victim. But that is definitely another form of narcissism I now see, of course. But so yeah, anyway, I went no contact. Then, due to reasons that I'll get into in another episode probably, I then had to go back. I decided to go back to Belgium after 2 years in Spain. I could have stayed in Spain, but I felt like, okay, I need to go back. I need a reset. So I went to my mom's house and I was there for 6 months, and it was absolutely the reset that I needed. She provided this cocoon for the winter for me where I could just exist. And I could just, she had no expectations of me, and it was actually a very healing phase for me and my mom where she really took care of me. And I don't know if she's watching, she doesn't always have time, but she really helped me through those 6 months. That was really a big transition for me of coming back from Spain before I was gonna come over here again to the US, because my daughter also moved from being with me in Spain back to Arizona to be with her little sister. That was a whole big shift for me, a whole emotional thing that I had to deal with. And then I went back to Belgium, and I knew that, okay, me being here means that like I'm literally so close to my son right now. What am I gonna do with this? And so I got in touch with my brother first, with several brothers. Then I got in touch with my father, and then we set up this place where we could meet with my son and my son's dad, and we were all together. And my dad was very helpful in that situation, that he was basically this buffer. He was this buffer for any behavior that was not appropriate, that was just not okay, so that would not happen. And so in the beginning, that all went really well, and I was able to really spend a lot of time with my son. Oh yeah, what I forgot to say also is that a few months, so we're gonna rewind a little bit to before I was in Belgium. I was still in Spain. I was still living in Spain. Suddenly, I find out, I try to access my bank app, and I want to go in my son's savings account that has that's in my name. So it's a savings account on, like, in my name, that's for my son, and that I put money in from my cleaning job when I was very pregnant, cleaning houses, and then doing this job while he was born, all this stuff. There was money in it, not a whole bunch, but there was, I don't know, there was some money in it. It was a decent amount of money that I was saving for him. I was still adding money here and there. I had accounts for both my kids. Suddenly that I cannot access that anymore. It's not in my app. So I contact the bank. I ask, why is this account just gone? It's no longer in any of my accounts. And they say, because you don't have custody, or you have no... Basically, I find out through the bank that he went behind my back and took custody from me. And yeah, so his version is, you were not in touch, you this, you that. But the version that nobody knows is, of course, that's also the story that everyone hears, that I was not in his life. The version that nobody hears is the perpetual harassment that I've had to deal with for 2 years. The just attacking of my character. There's a cat right there. It's the same one.
It's the same one.
Mm-hmm. So basically, yeah, the way that I've been treated, it's abuse. It was verbal and psychological abuse that I had to tolerate, and that he felt he had a right to do to me because I had decided to end the relationship years before. Like, this is in 2021 that I ended the relationship. And in 2023 is when all this custody stuff happened. And basically, like, nobody tried reaching out to me. I never heard from anyone that asked for my side of the story, and I mean legally, court. They could find me for my taxes. They could find me when it was all about paying taxes, but when it's about this, they suddenly had no information for me. That seems a little weird. All very strange. So that happened. Anyway, so all that happened in between. So legally, I was not even allowed to see my son unless he was there. So basically what happened is I got to see my son during those 6 months that I spent in Belgium. I got to see him regularly. But it's always like, oh yeah, but then you have to deal with my treatment of you. And when my dad was present, there was not really any problem. But it would be those moments where my dad would turn his back or go to the bathroom. Suddenly the switch would flip, and it's like there was something else happening. And this whole entity worked through him that just could not control his emotions. He just could not control himself. And then there was an incident in the middle of the street where I'm saying goodbye to my son, and he grabs my arm and he won't let go, and he's like basically saying that I won't listen to him. I'm like, and then I really had to be direct, like, we are not friends. You have been calling me names. You have been harassing me. You have called my daughter ugly. Stuff like this that I have to deal with.
That is...
Then you judge my decisions when all I could have, like, I left Ian, my son, in his care because I thought it was for the best. And this is like, nobody sees that I could have easily taken him with. The reason why I left my son was literally so he would have a father, because he would have 100% committed suicide if I would have left with our son. So what I did was a sacrifice. I didn't go and party in Spain. I didn't go off and have a good time. I was miserable for a lot of those days, and it was one of the biggest initiation where I had to miss my son and be okay with the fact that he wasn't with me, so that I would not be blamed for anything, because I know it would have all been used against me. Basically, if I would have taken him with me, I would have been the terrible bad guy, and now I also am the terrible bad guy. It just doesn't matter. And the thing is, I left him so that he would not have an excuse to kill himself. So that's what I did. And I know this, and that's all. Like, nobody else needs to know this version. You don't need to understand why I did all these things, but that is basically the truth of it. So then that incident was like a week or a few weeks before I came back to the US. So I knew I was gonna have to say goodbye to my son again.
The incident where he was holding your arm?
So and basically I then said, we are not friends. You took custody from me. I have to tolerate you because otherwise I have no way of seeing my son. We are not friends. And I saw that this was a pattern that he also did with other friends or even his own dad. There would be explosive arguments with a lot of name calling, and then suddenly it would be like nothing ever happened. And this is very common for narcissists. They have these explosive arguments, and there is so much horrible name calling that happens, and then it's as if none of that, it's just swept under the rug, and I cannot be in touch with people that act like this.
Like they start to wonder why.
Yeah,
it's
and the thing is, I just don't do that. I won't tolerate that from anybody, and I don't care if I have a child with you. I will not tolerate it. So no, because people are like, yeah, how are you going to be an example for your child exactly like this? I am modeling the kind of behavior that I would never want my child. I don't want my child to think you have to tolerate this kind of talk from people just because they have something you want.
Yeah. And it would be so much more destructive if you stayed in the relationship out of obligation, because then you're doing something out of obligation, out of lack, out of control.
Yeah.
Rather than, and this is where I think so many parents, they think that they then become like completely responsible for the child, and that their responsibility towards themselves, it's like that doesn't exist anymore. The child's responsibility is the only thing that matters.
And also, I was so deep into the spiritual mystery school that was my life, because Spain was like living in a mystery school every day, and that's going to be for another episode. But what happened then is that I was every day so deep into my subconscious mind, diving into my soul, that I was having extremely clear communications with my son's higher self, and also just realizing I was getting a whole bunch of just timelines. I was seeing so many future timelines, even when I would make decisions, how they would unfold, if decisions were made, how everything would unfold, and it all led back to the same. It's like a cosmic GPS. It all led back to the same thing, which I'll get into in a little bit. But so I was in Belgium, I got to see my son, and then after that experience, I came to the US, and this whole game began again. This whole game of having 50 messages in my inbox, having missed calls. Like, I don't have notifications on for anything. I'm not gonna see a missed call. I'm definitely not gonna see a missed call at 4 in the morning. When it's my 4 in the morning, and you know it's my 4 in the morning, and you're just doing it to somehow do something. And so I decided, and I said this very clearly, I will not be interacting with any harassment. I will only respond to messages about our son. And so then somehow it became this whole thing again, where after a few months of this going very well, my daughter, we did a video call because my daughter was with me for the holidays. We did a video call with my son, so the kids got to see each other. And then I sent some pictures. He happened to be in the background in one of the pictures, and that triggered about 50 messages in my inbox, and usually I don't look at them because he deletes the messages and then it just says deleted message, and I have 50 notifications of 50 deleted messages. And this time I decided to keep on reading the stuff that I read about myself. I read all kinds of stuff about my dad, stuff about my mom, stuff about him, again, stuff about my daughter, stuff about how I didn't know anything, stuff about my friends, stuff about how I basically it was a demonic attachment speaking through him. I'm not going to say the worst stuff. Stuff that was just like, yeah.
It's like what you imagine in the Exorcist movie.
Yeah.
It's like someone going into the depths of like, how could someone even say that to somebody?
It was so terrible, some of these things. And the thing is, his family and friends do not know that side of the story. They know the side that he's telling, the perpetual victim story of she left me, she left our son, which was not the case. Never was supposed to be that way. So that's also the story he's telling him, I'm sure, or not really, but actually yes, because my son would tell me these things that made it very clear that he was being told things about me. And basically, where was I? So yeah, I'm not responding to any of these messages, and it's just all very weird. And I have not seen my son on camera since January, since the latest train of messages where I was called all kinds of horrible stuff again that I happen to read. Usually I don't see any of these messages because my notifications are off. I open these messages once a day. And so yeah, I saw all these things and I needed to see and I have not responded to anything. The only thing I've responded to was when he thought our son was injured. He fell, and I said, I hope everything's okay with him. And all other things I don't respond to. I am done talking. Mm-hmm. And if this is the price that I'm gonna have to pay, which means he has control over whether I see my son or not, that is fine, because I know God's plan already. I know God's plan, and I know, like, it's literally, I just have to sit back and let this all happen. I have seen all the timelines where both of my children will be back with me at some point. I've seen the timeline. And I have not spoken about this to other people, like very reputable oracles that I've been working with that like charge a lot of money for sessions that I'm friends with, and that I've not said a single word about this. And they literally said, there's gonna be some kind of a death happening on your son's side of the family, so potentially there's gonna be something happening. And she saw my son coming back to me, and I'm like, well, that's crazy, because that is literally what I've been seeing since 2022. That's what I've been seeing. So I have nothing to do. And like, people say, yeah, you could say these things to him. Why? Because I'm not playing this game. I'm not playing this game. The only way that he could find out about this is if he would be watching my podcast, which would be crazy. That would be even too crazy for you. An hour and a half of this just to now hear about this, that would be a little crazy, even for you.
It's interesting what people in desperation will do.
But anyway, so I don't wish that upon anyone. For people listening, you should never wish death or harm to those that are doing it to you, because the thing is, everyone gets eventually what they need to be served in life, what is for their highest and best. And I am not going to pretend to know what is in his best interest. Only Mother, Father, God knows. And I trust that when I'm making decisions that are in the highest alignment for my soul, that the same happens for other people, and that's all I have to worry about. So I'm not interested in saying negative things about him. I've never been interested in saying negative things about him, because this is still the father of my son. But I am seeing how all of this, because I've decided to take my energy back, to not engage in this whole theater production, and I don't care the stories that circulate about me, because I know that I'm nourishing and I'm nourishing and I'm nourishing myself in my life, while I can see how he's just spiraling into self-destruction, which will ultimately result in, let's give it 2 years. Back to you.
I think it's a potty break. We'll get right back into it. Okay. Potty. Fresh potty break.
Okay.
Are you all done with what you wanted to share?
Yes, I think we are.
All right. If I have any questions, I'll ask them.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just want to talk a little bit about my process of breaking free of the relationship with Nancy, who was my handler, who I was told was my mother growing up, and who participated in mind control psychological experiments where she raped me. She did many very heavy things to me. And so as right after Tia and I got married, that's where I left off, right? Yeah, right after Tia and I got married, that's when I noticed the thing with Shorn, when I was on our honeymoon. Then on the honeymoon, Tia had a dream where I was kidnapped, brainwashed, and then brought back to her, and she had to, I was in this state of mind control. And so I didn't know anything about the memories at that point. And then 2 weeks later, I had this rage release ceremony. I was just going through my spiritual process, and I was going deeper into these questions of what has actually happened in my life, what are people's intentions for me. And that's when I had the whole process of the pain coming up in my shoulder. And that pain is what then led me to the questions of, is Nancy my biological mother? What has actually happened to me in childhood? All of these different things. And so that happened in January of 2022. And the first week or two, it was very difficult. My mind felt like it was splitting. I was not receiving or accepting any of the information I was getting of that she's not my biological mother. All of these other things that happened to me, I was not accepting it. So after about a week or two, I felt like I was going to have to go into a mental hospital. So I said, I just need to accept this to then feel what happens from there. And it doesn't mean that I'm going super far into conclusions, but I'm accepting what's being shown to me right now, and then I'm figuring out the next step. And so that's where it really crystallized in that this was true, that she wasn't my mother, that all these things had happened to me. So I started having all these memories of the mind control experiments, her raping me, her breaking my rib when I was a baby, all of these different things that she participated in. And so the core abuse that I was having surface was around the relationship with her. So I decided that I had to figure out what was actually going on before I said anything, before I confronted or made anything known to anyone. And so I went into the same process, basically similar to what you did in your abusive relationship, which was create this kind of cover of like not telling them what I was actually feeling of in your marriage, is what I mean. In what I was actually feeling, and I had to lie in a way about certain things she was asking me because I didn't feel that it was appropriate at that time for me to speak or confront or reveal anything that I knew about these memories. So that was the process of reckoning. Each time I had this interaction with her, I had to really be compassionate towards myself. I had to find where I was having reactions in my body. Sometimes, I'd have an interaction and nothing would happen and I'd feel good. And then I'd have another call a week later and it would be like really, really difficult. And so luckily for me, I was not in the same state. And so that's part of why I want to tell this, is like having this physical distance between you and the narcissistic person is the major first step. And that in some way, that physical distance is going to need to be kind of the first step that allows you to break away and create a boundary so you can then examine things. And so it wasn't no contact right away. And I had all these conversations, had these interactions where she would synchronistically tell me things that I was wondering about that she didn't know she was giving me, this whole piece to the puzzle that was showing me that she did the exact same things that I was seeing in my memories. It was all this confirmation. I even one point she said on the phone, she was like, 2-year-olds, that's how I like them.
I remember you told me.
She said that, and I noted that. I was like on the phone, and that was one of the interactions that I had to work through that, because she said that directly to me, and I was like, oh my God. And I had to like breathe and stay in the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so it was like this whole thing about staying composed while staying true to myself and not allowing her questioning or her curiosity to make me say things preemptively, like I was going to get in trouble or like I was doing something wrong. And so this distance was created where I stopped relying on her for advice. I stopped sharing all these details in my life with her. And she started noticing it. And so she started acknowledging that. We'd have conversations, and it felt on a surface level like what it would look like if a healthy mother-son relationship was working through these things. The son breaking away, the son becoming less dependent on this umbilical cord. On a surface level, it looked like there was progress, but it was this mask from her the entire time. And so I knew that I was eventually going to confront her and to then eventually cut her out of my life. I made a decision pretty quickly that I was not going to keep her in my life, but I used this process to get to that state of forgiveness throughout that. And so I was saying, I'm not going to confront her until I get to this state of forgiveness. And so I ended up then getting the divorce because she couldn't handle what was going on in terms of this thing that was coming up with me, the depth that I was going into. And I then spent all of the money that I had, and that's where I was then forced to come back to Colorado to live with my brother. And I just want to give my brother Jesse a shout out. I don't think he's watching, but I love him. And he was this buffer, like you said. This is what made me think of it, like your mom was. Mm-hmm. He was this buffer for me in between this thing, and he gave me money to come back home to live with him for free so I could get this thing figured out. And he didn't know the extent of it at the time. He knew that I had uncovered memories of abuse. I hadn't told him what it was. He knew it was with her. So I knew I was eventually going to talk to him, tell him everything, and then confront her. And so he guided me back to his house, and he's this big, burly fucking like bear that is like, makes you feel protected if he's loyal to you. And so again, he was like this buffer, like I felt so protected there. And that's where I knew, wow, I spent all this money to come home to have this confrontation. I wanted to have this confrontation with Nancy over the phone, but I just was pulled back into this because I had to do it. And Jesse really helped guide me. And so I ended up telling Jesse what was going on, and he decided to join in on the conversation. I asked him to be there, the one where I confronted Nancy. And so he was very neutral. He still is remaining very neutral, but he's been extremely supportive for me throughout this entire process. So he again was this buffer. He didn't do anything in the conversation, but be present. And I was allowed to speak everything that I needed to speak. And so it eventually, at that point, it led to like, we're not talking. The only thing that we're talking about, me and Nancy, is this subject. And if you want to have a conversation, you can text me and we can coordinate a time to actually have the conversation. So I was then living at Jesse's still. He only lived like 20 minutes away from her. But then this whole thing unfolded where she didn't respect the boundaries. She kept doing the narcissistic things. And so when I made this first breakaway with her, I then ran into this girl that I knew in high school, who I dated in high school. And we had this like very like intense coming together, like head over heels type feeling. And I had this whole perspective that like she was this like soul that was coming in that was this divine counterpart, almost this like divine alignment. And but at the same time, I still had these boundaries up, and it seemed like this whole serendipitous thing of like, right when I'm breaking away from Nancy, this is when I'm meeting with her, like I'm cutting Nancy out of my family, I'm feeling these things for her. So it was like all these things. But because of the way that I express and that the level of just devotion I have to timing and faith in my life, she started seeing me as like emotionally unstable, as being what you were talking about that the narcissists do, of having these grand ideas and these grand things and then nothing happening from it. That's what she was seeing from me. And so it was a very short sample period. It was like a month that we were together. But all of these things started showing me that she had this level of like, she wanted this sense of control over the situation. And the way that it then went down, she wanted to assert control in this type of like power dynamic of having space. And then once I voiced the way that I felt, she got extremely upset at me, said that I was like overstepping all of these things, that and I became the bad person. But really, what happened was I was still breaking free of these narcissistic wounds that I was holding in my body. And so at that point, I then ended up meeting this friend who, her name is Lisa. I already gave Lisa a shout out on this one. And she presented as this whole victim to this whole life situation. And it created this whole opportunity for me to move in with her, to be a roommate. I didn't have a lot of money. I've told this whole story before on my YouTube. But anyways, the same exact thing then happened with her, where I saw this level of like potential friendship, this soul recognition of like, we've had lives together. But then it started turning into this like, she wanted this dominance over the situation. And she then started doing the things that the person that you were just talking about was doing to you. She started saying, she accused me of stealing from her, of like stealing her life and leeching onto her life, and saying all of these ridiculous things to me. And so at that point, I left that house and was back and was living back with Jesse again. And it was this whole reckoning with like, what the fuck just happened? Like, I was used to that at that point of having things come up quick to where I have to then make decisions of like, what you thought was happening is not what's happening and you need to deal with it. And so it was like, wow.
That's a good one.
Like that's exactly what it felt like. Cause it's like, and it's just this slow turn. It's like, in the situation, I start getting all these messages from this psychic who's doing videos on YouTube, and she's talking about someone trying to steal my projects and claim them as hers. And I was thinking about this other person in my life, thinking they were going to come back in and try and like come in and swoop this thing. But then it just slowly started unfolding, where then I saw that it was her. It was Lisa that she was talking about.
And at that point, we were also
and we had
connecting.
met. Yeah, we did our podcast.
Yes.
We were friends. We were starting that whole thing.
Yes.
So the whole thing here is like, the narcissistic wound is going to keep calling that to you until you're able to move through it. So like, you need to be able to still hold these boundaries. And basically what I was getting at is like, create these buffer systems. Like, you need to be able to voice boundaries, voice no physical contact, then eventually voice no contact. Like, going through this process of confrontation. So that's where I was. So now I cut Nancy out of my life. Like, basically, I still had her number, and I was still having these interactions with the people on her side of her family, the narcissists on her family. And so there was still these like chords that were happening, these like energy dynamics. Like on my false birthday this last year, she sent me this message, and then my stepdad sent me this other message, and it was this whole like narcissistic targeting thing. And so it ended up getting to the point where I was like, okay, this has to be the final confrontation. I have to now tell her everything that I know, because I wasn't revealing everything that I knew about her. And I have to completely cut her out of my life. I have to go full no contact, block her entirely. So that's what it came down to. I wrote her a letter. I dropped the letter at her house in physical person as she watched me walk away from the house and get back in the car without saying anything to her. And the letter informed her that I would be blocking her and all of her family, and that I would no longer have contact with her in my life at all. And so I haven't since then. And it is just, again, this recognition that you have to go through these things, and you have to honor yourself throughout this process, no matter what type of obligations and intimidation is being flashed at you throughout this whole thing. And this is where we get into this aspect of karma too, and how you're saying, like, we don't wish harm upon the person. We're not cursing them and doing and making them separate and deeming them as this evil person who's not worthy of divinity. And we're recognizing what karma is, and that karma is a boomerang, and that when you throw the boomerang of karma, it is going to come back to you. And those who are moving out of their karma are going to recognize that and catch it and be able to work with it. But those who are not willing to face their karma are going to get hit right in the face with the boomerang. And it's their own making of them shoving down all of these unprocessed emotions, all of this trauma, making people feel the way they've made them feel. They're going to reckon with all of that in their reality. And it's not a sense of punishment. It's the sense of the law of creation, that they're creating this in their reality and then taking it and projecting it on other people. So eventually that reality is going to manifest for them, and they're going to feel all of their deepest fears that cause them to make those decisions. All of their fears of dying alone, all of their fears of not being worthy, every single thing they are going to face eventually, because that is the law of karma. That is the law of the universe and the law of attraction. So the ability to move through these spaces does come down to the faith in the mechanics of the universe. And we just watched Tenet the other night, and that's the quote at the end. It's like, faith is not a disregarding of like letting it all up just for grabs. Faith is an expression of trust in the mechanics of creation and in the mechanics of the universe. And that goes with what you've experienced and the choices that everyone else is going to experience from the way that they are holding energy in their body.
And that is why, for example, I am able to completely release all control of what is unfolding in my life, because I am already seeing the effects of this karmic unfolding when I now look at how I communicate with my daughter's father, which is very okay. We are probably not gonna be best friends, but we can have really normal conversations about my daughter. We agree on everything. There is a very casual agreement when it comes to her and spending time with me, spending time with him. It is all, we just discuss things. And he has been doing work on himself. Like, it's clear that he is willing to do the stuff to look at some of this stuff. But then I'm not seeing that same... I sometimes think I see it, or I used to think that I saw it with my son's dad, but it has become very clear that that is not going to be the case. And I completely trust God that everything will always work out in everyone's favor. And what that needs to look like is not up to me to decide, because as long as I am doing the things that I am being told by my higher self to do, then I know that everything is always working out in everyone's favor. And one thing I do want to say, I made a video a couple days ago where I explain that you cannot, like, you may be the villain in somebody else's story, because they are going to be looking at it through their lens. And if they have a lens that is colored with a filter of victimhood, a filter of the inability to see the full spectrum of the entire story, then you are going to be the villain. And it's not up to you to change their perspective. You do not have control over their perspective on you or the situation or what they tell other people, because it's exactly the word that he used a little bit ago was intimidation. So in some of these messages, I was reminded this is an intimidation tactic. You don't have custody. There is nothing that you can do about this. You have lost him. You cannot change any of this. And then I'm like, fine. But that is not God's decision. That's a decision made by some government. This child is one day going to be 18. And this child has a sister and has other family members. And I will never be able to be blamed of anything that says wrong things, wishes harm on my child's father. Never, ever. That's all that I know. And I just release anything else because it's not up to me. And that is just my advice for you. If you are dealing with people in your life that are narcissistic, that have treated you in ways that are inhumane, is almost the word that I would use.
And we're constantly thinking about what we can do best for our kids, for our family, for our future, and it doesn't apply to someone who just has a family or kids. It's the individual. But it's like, this is where people get caught up in the ascension processes. They're not actually willing to question what relationships are doing this in their life. They're not willing to look at the obligations that they hold towards the family label and drop those obligations because they feel a sense of not wanting to upset their mother, not wanting to upset their father, it's like there has to be the balance of your heart coming first. And if someone else doesn't actually have your heart in mind, because they don't have their heart in mind, then that is the thing that's going to be detrimental to you moving forward.
I think this is a long one.
It was a long one.
I think this is it for now. We can definitely continue. Also, write in the comments, please, because we see a lot of views. You all watch this. The Spotify account has quite a nice number of followers, actually, the podcast. The Substack, we have a lot of subscribers. I know we get a lot of views on YouTube. Please leave your comments.
Yeah.
Ask us stuff. Ask us questions. We want to hear your experiences. What does this bring up for you? Ask stuff so that we have more stuff so that we can share the stuff that you are interested in hearing.
Maybe we should make an email for people to submit to.
There is an email address, and it is going to be in the description. It's basically, I think, the Temple Podcast at Proton Mail something.
Okay.
But it's connected to the Substack.
If someone has a story they want to share or anything like that, that they don't want to write in the comments or something like that, that's about this, feel free to send it to this email. And, we're not going to release your information or details or anything, but it's nice for all of us who have gone through these types of things to just start talking about it, start sharing it, and, finding new perspectives and ways to help each other just from being seen, just from speaking it out. And that's why we do this, because this is helping us first. The collapse of timelines that are no longer in our alignment are happening because we're speaking these things on video to get them out of our system and articulate them. And so it's a very, very valuable process to speak these things out loud.
And I really want to emphasize, now that we have reached the end of this podcast, us saying these things is never meant as poisonous arrows towards those people, because we surrender and trust God and we want the best for everyone involved. But often in those cases, these people don't even align with what is best for themselves. So
it's just about recognize love is unconditional, relationships are not, and love is not this ooey gooey romantic I love you type of thing. It's a divine recognition. It's saying we are one, all is of or nothing is, and you get to stay over there while I stay over here. And I just had this really good thing that I lost. It was like a tagline.
It's okay, you can think of it while I say something else. So also, I have a webinar. It is titled Celestial Understanding of Traumatic Soul Contracts. This is all about the energetics of soul contracts, connected to toxic relationships, psychological healing, physical healing, what happens in your brain when you heal from narcissistic abuse, how to look at this from an energetic point of view. It is very layered. So if you are interested in that, you can find it in the shop on my website. We, of course, offer services together. We do stuff together, sessions, also separate readings. He does readings, I do readings. I do sessions, he does sessions. We do them together. We do all kinds of stuff. So, yep.
And that will all be in the description. Those links, right?
Yes, everything is always in the description. Did you remember?
I did. So it's just about recognizing the other as self in oneness, and then putting trust and faith in the highest reality outcome for the benefit of all souls. And what people need to experience, that karma that they need to experience, it's going to happen when you hold the trust and faith in everything working out in its highest alignment. So that's where you don't become this fighting fire with fire, spreading negativity, doing all these things. Be a warrior, use your voice, stand in your foundation, and recognize someone in forgiveness while kind of saying, fuck you sometimes.
Yes, and the last thing before we end is, I am talking about this because I've started talking about this here and there, and mothers have started reaching out to me that have gone through similar situations and that felt like they didn't have any place to go with these stories. And that is also why I decided to talk about this a little bit more. So any questions, any stories that you want to share, there will be information in the description on where to do that. Okay.
Sounds good.
And we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.